is the title of my presentation, Cultural Education and Sustainable Development. So this lecture provides more of a framework of doing educational activities related to culture in general and cultural heritage in particular. So we need to level off on our definitions, how we define culture, how we define cultural education, how we define sustainable development. I know for some of you who are already experts in the field, this may be too redundant, but I know there are students also listening to us right now. So culture is defined in many ways, but we anthropologists usually use the earliest definition of culture as defined by Sir Edward Burnett Tylor in his book Primitive Culture, published in 1871. Tylor said that culture refers to that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, and many other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So we will be discussing culture here in its broadest sense and not limited to aesthetics or art per se. Now, what is cultural education? Most of the literature on cultural education, unfortunately, comes from the West. And let me read it first, and then I'll give you some of my comments on these definitions. So the first definition comes from Germany, where it says that cultural education is a personal development using forms of cultural expression, arts, and playing. It is a prerequisite for cultural participation. It is general education because it enables children and the young people to relate to themselves and to the world through playing, arts, and culture. The second definition comes from Belgium, where it says that cultural education consists in the development of all arts, music, language, literature, and world heritage. It contributes to knowledge transfer, personal development, and participation in society. It enables children to uh, develop certain talents and introduces them to aesthetics and ethics to express their feelings and assign meaning to the world around them. So in these two definitions, we will see that the focus of cultural education is on children and young people. But I would like to add that in the Philippine setting, cultural education is very much relevant also to certain adults that are not within formal education, such as those of indigenous peoples in their respective communities that would tap on their own culture in order to understand sustainable development fully. Now, what is sustainable development? And I know that Nayong Filipinos' objectives or goals are towards the achievement in helping the country achieve sustainable development. So, sustainable development, as defined by the United Nations, refer to development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is based on the 1987 Brundtland Report. In 2015, the United Nations adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These are goals that are integrated and indivisible to achieve sustainable development at the global level. So there is a global target which the UN hopes that countries in the world or members of the UN system can achieve by 2030. They are integrated and indivisible targets or goals because one goal is very much linked with other goals. You cannot do one without dealing with other goals. So this slide shows the icons for the different 17 SDGs. Just to put it on context where education is, SDG 1 calls for no poverty by 2030. SDG 2, zero hunger. SDG 3, good health and well-being. SDG 4, quality education. SDG 5, gender equality. SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. SDG 13, climate action. SDG 14, life below water. SDG 15, life on land. SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And lastly, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. With each SDG having several targets. I won't be discussing each SDG because we won't have time for that. So I will focus on SDG 4, which is very much related to the topic that I will be discussing right now on quality education. So SDG 4 calls for quality education, and the target is the goal is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. I think no one among us will dispute that this is definitely needed. In the Philippine setting, we know that inclusivity is not yet fully achieved. There are many sectors within our society that could still not afford to go to school, and many with different abilities and backgrounds also have no access to equitable quality education. For example, in terms of abilities, for example, many schools will have armchairs on the right, which favor right-handed persons and discriminating left-handed ones. Now, as I mentioned, each SDG will have several targets. And for SDG 4, there are 7 targets. I will run through them quickly and then focus on some more than others. The first target, all of this is by 2030. Ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning. Second target, ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education. Target 3, ensure equal access for all women and men to affordable quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including at the university level. Target 4, substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. Target 5, eliminate gender disparities in education and ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and children in vulnerable situations. Target 6, ensure that all youth and a substantial proportion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. And target 7, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So the topic that we're discussing today is more in line with target number 7 because it espouses cultural diversity and how we could use culture, in this case, cultural education, for sustainable development. But that doesn't mean that the earlier targets are not relevant to our discussion. For example, in target number 5, it talks about indigenous peoples, and we know that indigenous peoples will also have their unique cultures and traditions and practices that have to be respected, and we want to incorporate them into our mainstream educational systems. So one of the keywords described at target number 7 is education for sustainable development. Now, what is this? By the way, there are, before I discuss ESD, there are other three targets actually. I removed target B because that was already achieved way back in 2020. The target was 2020. But I won't be discussing these other two targets, which are more related to facilities and teacher number of teachers in schools. I mentioned ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development, which UNESCO in 2014 defined as including key sustainable development issues into teaching and learning. For example, issues on climate change, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity, poverty reduction, and sustainable consumption. So we want to mainstream within the educational system as well as in non-formal education that these issues are covered. ESD also requires participatory teaching and learning methods that motivate and empower learners to change their behavior and take action for sustainable development. So, for example, there was a time that in a project that I was involved in, we looked at certain schools in Metro Manila. I won't mention the schools now. These are elementary schools where at the school level, children or the pupils are taught not to throw their garbage anywhere. There are garbage bins inside the classroom as well as in the school grounds. And the students comply. But we noticed when they go to their homes, they just throw trash anywhere. So why is it that they learned something in school, but they don't carry it when they go back to their respective homes? And we saw the gap that because parents are also not educated with the need to segregate trash. So there's a different behavior in the schools and different behavior at home. So we want a link in these types of behavior. ESD consequently promotes competencies such as critical thinking, imagining future scenarios, and making decisions in a collaborative way. So it's not just the teacher telling students, do this, do that, but it's very participatory and it requires concrete action and change of behavior. And there's collaboration between the school, the community, the parents, and other stakeholders. Now, many of you probably are not aware that the Philippines has a national environmental education action plan that covers the years of 2018 to 2040. I have here, I cannot be seen because it's also colored green. I have a copy of this NEAP, which was produced by the DENR, and it mentions as its objective of the plan is to support the achievement of SDGs in the Philippines through environmental education by capitalizing on local values and culture as a viable approach to achieve sustainable development. Actually, the model comes from Bhutan, where in Bhutan, we noted, because I was part of the team that developed this action plan, we observed that there was an incorporation of Bhutanese traditional values in uh, in facilitating the achievement of the SDGs. And we here in the Philippines conducted several workshops among different stakeholders, including members of the DNR and other government agencies that are part of the National Education Program, uh, such as DILD, TESDA, CHED, etc., and as well as principals, school administrators, students at the primary and secondary levels. And based on this, we identified the values that may be utilized in achieving the SDGs in the case of the Philippines. So this is the output. We were able to identify 3 Filipino values that were deemed to be facilitating values in achieving SDGs. These are bayanihan, pagtitipid, and malasakit. So the 17 SDGs are the goals, while these 3 ones are the facilitating values in achieving these goals. Of course, there are many other values that are found in Philippine culture, but we deemed that it will be better to focus on some that are easily translatable to the SDG targets. So we can understand, for example, why pagtitipid is there, because it has something to do with sustainable consumption and production. Another output that we produced is a learning module on SDGs used at the elementary level. So the target audience are elementary and junior high school students. And the strategy is to incorporate this into social studies for elementary classes and social science for junior high school subjects. The module is written in Filipino and it comes with a teacher's guide. You may be wondering about the translation. Some are not comfortable with this Filipino translation because the translation of SDGs is mga hangarin para sa likas kayang pag-unlad. This translation, as we understood it, is already a standard as used in DENR. And so that is why we used this formulation of SDGs instead of sustainable, likas kaya. Now, of course, we could only do cultural education for sustainable development if different individuals, teachers, administrators, schools, and other implementers are culturally competent. And cultural competence, but here is defined as an ongoing process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, sexual orientations, abilities, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of which. So it is very inclusive. And this could be operationalized by incorporating culturally competent organizations with their ability to integrate and transform knowledge about diversity into specific standards, policies, practices, etc., to produce better services and outcomes. Now, this will entail being able to accept, appreciate, and accommodate cultural differences, valuing diversity and accepting and respecting differences, accepting that one has an influence when one interacts with others, understanding and managing the dynamics of difference when cultures intersect, have the willingness to examine components of cross-cultural interactions, and the skills that are needed will be to be aware of one's own culture, values, and biases, being aware of and working at controlling your own biases and how this may affect interactions with others, realizing that knowledge is culture specific, having the knowledge of institutional barriers that prevent some populations from accessing resources, and having the ability to build strong cultural relationships and being at ease with difference, having flexibility and ability to adapt to diverse environments, and the ability and willingness to be an ally with individuals who are different from oneself, having effective communication skills across differences, and lastly, having the ability to mediate cross-cultural conflicts. I know we have limited time. I could discuss more of this during the open forum, but let me give you some examples. Here are some examples of cultural education activities that may be conducted at the school setting or in the non-formal setting. For example, asking pupils and even communities to tell local people's stories. After storytelling sessions, in order to analyze them, questions may be asked such as, what are the themes of these stories? What types of worldviews are reflected in these different genres of folklore? And from there, we will be able to see why do people believe in certain things, and what are the recurring themes, what are their aspirations, etc. What are the things they want to continue? What are the things they want to preserve? What are the things they want to change? Another example activity is the teaching of indigenous dances depicting the movement of animals. Of course, we may teach many types of indigenous dances, but for example, in order to relate it with biodiversity, are these animals still existing today? Are they threatened or endangered? Why or why not? Ano? So in many indigenous communities in the Philippines, there will be dance forms imitating the movement of birds, or among the Aita, there will be a monkey dance. And this will be entry points in discussion about sustainability in terms of biodiversity. Another activity, I just gave 4 examples. This is the third one, will be an activity in cooking traditional cuisines or preparation of traditional delicacies and cuisines. Are these vegetables and ingredients still locally available? Why are some of them no longer found in the market? Uh, so even here in Metro Manila, there are many among young people who are no longer familiar with certain fruits, such as, for example, they don't know kamachile or duhat because they don't see them anymore in the market. So this will be a good entry point in the discussion. And a last example will be producing or reproducing native handicrafts, textiles, brassware, uh, uh, paper mache products, etc., etc. So what materials are used in these types of crafts? What are the inspiration for their designs? For example, in this picture, we see a Tiboli weaver of the Abaca textile known as Tinalak. And we know that the Tiboli are dream weavers. The designs come from inspirations culled from their dreams. Many of these are animal or floral designs. And again, we can relate it with culture, we can relate it with uh, biodiversity, such as abaca, why it's no in the past we were the #1 producer, but not anymore in the world, the type of dyes that are used, and of course the knowledge of who are the carriers of this knowledge. Many of them are already elderly. So to sum up, I would like to emphasize that cultural education is a specific method of learning that is appropriate for children, youth, and members of indigenous communities. The techniques used in cultural education are very innovative and participatory, as opposed to formal and structured types of education conducted in our schools today. Cultural education may definitely be used in attaining SDG 4 on quality education in particular, but it may also be used as a stepping stone in understanding, being aware, and eventually achieving other goals, the 16 other goals in the SDGs. So with this, I would like to end my discussion. I know we will have an open forum, but in case we have very limited time, you may email me at mtcastro1@up.edu.ph, and also view my other video lectures that are found on YouTube. Please look for Nestor Castro or ncastro87, and please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Castro, for your insightful talk. Okay, let us now listen or read some comments or questions from our viewers. Earlier, we asked our participants, our viewers, to put their questions on our comment section. Okay, so we have actually a few questions here, Dr. Castro. First, based on our current situation, in what percentage are we in achieving the SDG targets with regards to providing equal education and education sustainable development? For you personally po, Dr. Castro.
Okay. Unfortunately, when I was part of a technical working group that developed the National Education Environmental Education Action Plan for 2018 to 2040, I was no longer part of it later on. And so I was not able to monitor what is going on right now. The second problem is the onset of COVID-19. And definitely it affected the implementation of the program. Actually, it derailed. There were several setbacks, even within schools. Up to now, many schools are having blended types of education, and we should evaluate whether our students are really learning using this type of approach. We have a lot of anecdotes that there are many problems, and I could share many stories from my own students, a lot of mental health problems, a lot of limitations due to lack of infrastructure, such as no access to laptops, even smartphones. I have a student, this is a graduate student uh, who is based in Tawi-Tawi, and every time we have an online class, she will go on top of the roof to get a signal. So these are barriers. I talked about the barriers. So there's really a need. Thank you for the question. There's really a need to measure. So I believe we are very far behind. Uh, and although the Philippines adjusted its targets all the way to 2040, they added 10 more years to the to the UN target. But I believe we still have a lot of problems. I don't have any quantitative um, data, but yeah, that's my belief.
Thank you so much. Another question po. In a diverse cultural nation like the Philippines, is there also various definition of cultural education which might be unique in each cultural group?
Ah, actually, that's a very interesting comment. Unfortunately, I have not incorporated it in the discussion. But if we are true to being culturally sensitive, then uh, how cultural education is conducted should be culturally sensitive as well. So, for example, I mentioned that yes, we could uh, emulate, copy, or imitate certain cultural practices of indigenous communities, such as their dances, their music, etc., so that students may learn about culture, cultural heritage, and sustainability. So that's the general principle. However, we could only do that if indigenous people allow us, give us consent to use them for our purpose. Because there are certain types of knowledge and practices that the indigenous people own, and they feel that it is a form of cultural appropriation if it is used for other purposes other than for its original use. For example, certain dances that are only performed during rituals, you cannot do it in an everyday setting, or else it's not culturally sensitive. So, actually, maganda yung tanong. Dapat may caution din tayo. What is allowed and what is not allowed. Including yung adjusting it to the audience. Kasi okay lang kung general audience ang pinag-usapan natin, such as school children. But if we're doing cultural education for indigenous peoples themselves or indigenous communities, then our methodology may change. I remember, for example, among the Aita, there was a time that psychologists use the thematic apperception test and showed it to the AITA and asked questions. So sa psych, meron tayong TAT, such as a poster showing a woman carrying luggage on the railway station. And we want to ask individuals, tell me a story of what you see in this poster. Of course, an individual may say, nag-break sila ng kanyang boyfriend, kaya siya naandyan, uwi na siya sa probinsya. And then the psychologist or psychiatrist interprets these themes coming from that individual. We know we can use this for groups of people as well because they have common knowledge, common experience. But when it was used among the Aita, tell me a story of what you see, and then the Aita will answer, how can I tell a story? But that's not me. No, for example, that's you. No, it cannot be. I am here. She's there. So appropriateness of instruments and tools should also be considered. So why select certain techniques over others that are appropriate to the community?
All right. So, ayan po. Another question po. In promoting cultural education, how can one ensure that they are providing indigenous groups a platform to tell their story rather than speaking over them?
Again,
Yeah,
very good
yes.
questions. I think we have very intelligent participants in this seminar. I think the key here would have a link. So the ESD or the SDGs say that it should be integrated. So we don't do certain actions divorced from other stakeholders. So if we will be using art forms coming from indigenous communities, then we have to consult them. Am I doing it right? Did I portray you correctly? Or am I doing a stereotype? Am I generalizing that this is how you do it, but actually it's only a segment of your community that does it while others don't? So it is important to establish these links with indigenous communities and not saying bato-bato sa langit, because there are many experts would say, I've studied that community and I know how they did it. But we know cultures change. Cultures that have been documented in the past, even by anthropologists, now may no longer be like that. So this is why it has to be an iterative process. We go back and forth to indigenous communities in order to validate our what we have formulated and what we are proposing.
Yan po. I agree with you po, no, Doc Castro. And isa po yan, no, sa mga challenges natin, yung misinterpretation po, no, ng kanilang culture, ng kanilang traditions, of course, and ng kanilang values. Ayan po. We still have question here. Last one. How will the plan of DepEd regarding the implementation of mother tongue affect the cultural education in the Philippines?
Okay, so I'm not in primary education,
Yes,
so I won't claim to be an expert on it. We know that in the past and up to now, I think, I would like to believe we are implementing MTBMLE, but there have been proposals. I don't know if there are already policies by DepEd to move away from it. Okay. But even the MTBMLE itself there are still some limitations. Many of it are still within the major languages in the Philippines, such as Tagalog, Ilocano, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, etc., etc. And for many indigenous communities in the Philippines, mother tongue based education is still not being utilized. I know that there are limitations because the teachers themselves are not familiar with the local language. So, for example, an Ilocano teacher who is assigned to Ifugao may not be familiar with Ayangan Ifugao or Tuwali Ifugao. Second is the production of materials. Some materials, modules and materials. Uh, so there are no really experts yet in translating or producing local materials. And even those that are bato-bato sa langit again, produced by DepEd, we know there are a lot of problems in the modules, problems of errors, for example. Now, so there are still many limitations. I would promote that it still be continued and even expanded to include other indigenous languages in the Philippines instead of veering away from it. Ang nangyayari kasi sa bansa natin, if there's a new set of government official, then there's a new policy. So, nangyayari, how can we achieve sustainability if the policies are not also sustainable? So, yun yung mga problema.
All right. Well, just a quick discussion about the last question. So, what are the possible challenges that we could somehow encounter in promoting the Filipino values in achieving SDGs?
Okay, again, very good.
Yes,
because when we develop the identification of these 3 Filipino values, we did workshops in Metro Manila, in Cebu, and one area in Mindanao. I forgot which area. So this came up as a result of those workshops. But I am not very sure if they are pan-Philippine to begin with, or what is the local version of these values, because they may be called by other names or may not be present at all. So yung applicability niya should still be tested and improved. I remember one colleague in UP from the history department, he was saying, I am Visayan. Sabi niya, wala kaming term ng pakikipagkapwa in our, so ano ba talaga siya? Pan-Philippine value ba siya talaga? But that was a question that he wanted to raise. It's not that he says that there is no such a thing. So, yun, there should be a continuing process of validating. And again, marami kasi sa ginagawa natin sa ating bansa, yung marami tayong plans, di ba? Pero the implementation of these plans are, hindi naman never. There are witnesses in monitoring and assessing and evaluating these plans. Because if we are able to evaluate them, then we don't want to repeat previous mistakes and we want to improve on them. So, yun, dapat, and then, dapat din i-localize. Kasi, sige, maglalabas ang DepEd ng module, pero the module is probably for different areas of the country. Pero when it is not totally acceptable or appropriate for one community, then don't force it. Hindi dapat ganon. Although may debate dito, kasi sasabihin ng DepEd na hindi po pwede yan. There should only be one. Yan ang stand ng DepEd. Again, I will Not totally agree kasi that's why we have Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act na may right ang Indigenous people to their self-identity and their own educational systems. Secondly, we have autonomous regions for Muslim Mindanao. While there is no autonomous region yet in the Cordillera, but the Philippine Constitution guarantees that there should be autonomy within the Cordillera. So, yon, diversity should be incorporated into the design of different modules, policies, programs, plans, etc.
All right, so that's it. Thank you so much po, Dr. Castro. We have learned so much from you po talaga. Ayan po. So, we still have some questions left, but we are running out of time.